Is the U.S. in or out of the global agreement to address climate change? Right now, we are awaiting President Trump's decision, which he is expected to announce 3 p.m. Eastern Time today. Good morning. Welcome to Happening Now on this Thursday. I'm John Scott.
And I'm Heather Childers in for Jenna Lee again. You know, it could be maybe one of the most anticipated, most watched announcements of his presidency. Do you think so?
He likes to keep us guessing.
Yeah. Whether or not, in fact, to stick with the Paris Accord and the U.S. pledge to nearly 200 other countries to reduce pollution.
Very soon.
Are you leaning towards getting out?
Yeah, you're going to find out very soon.
Very soon. All this, as we learned, former FBI Director James Comey is set to testify before senators about the Russia investigation and his claim that the president asked him to back off.
Let's get the latest from our chief White House correspondent, John Roberts, who's live on the North Lawn right now. John?
John, good morning to you. James Comey, the former FBI director, expected to testify before the Senate Intelligence Committee as soon as next week. We're told that Comey has been running by his testimony with the special prosecutor Robert Mueller to ensure that there's no conflict between what Comey might say in Congress there under oath before the Senate Intelligence Committee and the investigation that Robert Mueller is conducting into what influence, if any, Russia was trying to exact on the American election. On the House side of things are starting to move pretty quickly. Subpoenas have been sent to the FBI, the CIA, and the NSA requesting documents on Susan Rice, the former National Security Advisor in the Obama White House, John Brennan, the former CIA director, and Samantha Power, who was the ambassador to the United Nations under President Obama. Power has never been mentioned until now in connection with the investigation, but Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes believes that she had significant involvement in the unmasking of members of the Trump campaign from intelligence documents. The ranking member, by the way, Adam Schiff, has set out his own set of subpoenas. They include to Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, the former National Security Advisor, as well as Michael Cohen, who is a personal attorney to President Trump. And this afternoon, we are going to, as you mentioned, find out what President Trump is going to do on the Paris Climate Accord. 3 o'clock in the Rose Garden, he will announce his decision. He spent many months talking to people on both sides of this issue. There you see him speaking with members of the G7. Climate change was a big topic of the conversation in Sicily, Italy last week. And competing factions here at the White House, some of whom would like to see the president stay in, and a lot who would like to see the president get out. On the get out side is David Bossie, the former deputy campaign manager and Fox News contributor who spoke just a little while ago here on Fox News. Listen here.
I think President Trump is going to get out of this Paris Accord and decide to put American jobs, American workers, and the American economy first and create new agreements with the world.
Now, in terms of the options that the president has for getting out, he does have a number of them. I mean, he could have a wholesale withdrawal from the Paris Climate Accord and everything else associated with it, or he could do a kind of piecemeal, withdraw from some things but stay in the overall framework of the accord. We're told that he is still deliberating exactly what to do, John, but we'll find out in about 4 hours' time.
John Roberts, our chief White House correspondent. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting day. Thank you, John.
As always.
Yes. So we're watching for the testimony of former FBI Director James Comey before the Senate Intelligence Committee. That could happen next week. It would be Mr. Comey's first public comments on the Russia investigation and his claim that President Trump asked him to back off since his firing last month. And one former CIA director says that could be a big problem.
Clearly, when the president urges the FBI director not to continue an investigation, there's no question that it smacks of obstruction.
Let's bring in Joe Trippi, former campaign manager for Howard Dean and a Fox News contributor. Josh Holmes is former chief of staff to Senator Mitch McConnell. Thanks, both of you guys, for being here. Joe, are you convinced that there's going to be solid evidence that this is some kind of obstruction of justice by the White House?
Well, I don't know if there'll be solid evidence, but I think Comey's testimony, if it is that he was asked to, could you let Flynn go, that kind of testimony that we're hearing is potentially what he's going to say. If he says that, it just says to me that you're going to see this investigation and the consequences hang over this White House probably for years. I mean, all through the 2018 election for sure, and probably beyond. It's not going to go away if that's Comey's testimony.
A law professor named F.H. Buckley has written a piece for FoxNews.com that I saw this morning, and I wanted to read you part of it. He says, the best evidence that Trump wasn't pressuring Comey is that he didn't resign. However else we might be divided, we can all agree that Trump shouldn't have fired Comey on May 9th. He should have done so on January 20th. This was, after all, what the Democrats had wanted. And the piece goes on from there. Josh, what do you think about that?
Well, look, all that's rearview mirror, right? He didn't fire him when he first got in office, and he fired him when he did. The question is, what is the significance of the Comey testimony next week? And, my take is not much. We already know exactly what it is that the former FBI director is going to say. He leaked it out, or his allies leaked it out, front pages of every newspaper in the English-speaking world, basically every day since he's no longer been at the FBI. And so the question that I ask is, how consequential is this open testimony going to be? And I think the conclusion has to be not very much.
Hillary Clinton, I suppose, would call it a nothing burger, Joe. So far, I mean, Democrats seem to be, they're talking about recapturing Congress in 2018 as in part as a result of what comes out of this Russia investigation and the testimony of James Comey. Do you see it being politically that consequential?
I think there's absolutely been political consequences to this. It's knocked the president's agenda off the front pages. He's talking more about Russia, tweeting more about it, and it's having an impact on his favorability ratings. I mean, they are so low that, yes, if there was an election today, it would be a very good time to be running as a Democrat. That's not just the case with this president. It's the case with any president with these low ratings, and there's no way to get around that the Russia investigation is eroding his favorability ratings. They're historically low.
Well, in the meantime, he is the president, and he beat Hillary Clinton. She is speaking out rather publicly about her election loss and those whom she blames for it, including her own party apparatus.
I inherit nothing from the Democratic Party. It was bankrupt. It was on the verge of insolvency. Its data was mediocre to poor, non-existent, wrong. I had to inject money into it.
This is the DNC.
The DNC to keep it going.
So Hillary Clinton, Josh, you're laughing there. Hillary Clinton says it was the DNC's fault, and actually we're going to get to some other folks that she blames for her loss. What's your take, Josh?
Well, it's humorous to watch. I mean, she's providing her public analysis in like the second or third stage of grief, right? She's not worked her way all the way through to acceptance. But honestly, if I was running the RNC, I'd try to pick up the tab on her speaking fees to keep her out there, because she's probably the biggest gift that the Republican Party has at this point. The more that she can be on the television and talking about her analysis and her campaign and what she thinks ought to happen, the better Donald Trump looks every day.
Let's listen to a little bit more of her speech, and then we have sort of a verbate of the entire list. Listen to this.
My email account was turned into, the biggest scandal since Lord knows when. This was the biggest nothing burger ever. It was a mistake. I've said it was a mistake, but the way that it was used was very damaging. Whatever resentment or point of anger that you may have, if he can get into it, whether it's race or sex or xenophobia or anti-Islamophobia, whatever it is.
So in that address, Joe, Hillary Clinton blamed quite a number of people. We have a list. We're just going to run them on the screen because it would just about take too long to read. The FBI, the New York Times, James Comey, it goes on, down to misogynists, the Republican Party, and the Democratic Party, as well as suburban women. Joe, as a loyal Democrat, what do you think of Hillary's blaming these organizations and people?
Well, I mean, she also said that she made mistakes and her campaign made mistakes. And she said that wasn't the reason she lost. I think everybody's going to turn out to be right on this over time. When you lose the Electoral College by 77,000 votes, it turns out that just about any of the reasons she cited and her detractors cite is reality. She lost Michigan by something like 10,500 votes. I mean, that could be Russian trolls. It could be that she didn't go there enough. So I just think, look, she's got a right to express why she thinks she's lost. She's doing that. This is what she believes. And she did win the popular vote by 3 million. She lost the Electoral College by fewer than 100,000. And everybody who claims they know the reason is right, because you can't lose when you lose by that small margin. Every single thing that happened mattered, from a tweet to her schedule.
Her own abilities as a candidate, Josh, are not on that list.
No, I mean, it's really striking. As I said, you know, it's still the second or third stage of grief. It's everybody else's fault. She's sort of rationalizing why it is that she finds herself in this situation. But yeah, I mean, this is literally the reason why losing candidates go dark for a couple of years, because it's an extremely emotional process. It's one that you never want to see a candidate trying to figure out in public, but yet, you know, I guess the speaking fees are pretty luring or something, because she's putting herself out in a situation that I think is really doing herself a disservice.
Josh Holmes and Joe Trippi will continue to watch for future remarks from Mrs. Clinton. Gentlemen, thank you.
Good to be with you.
Thank you.
The Macedonia operatives. That
Yes,
was
Macedonia
something
operatives.
Too, yeah.
Well,
Well, Russian President Vladimir Putin, that was on that list. Well, today he says, telling reporters, that Russia has never engaged in hacking, suggesting instead that evidence pointing toward Moscow was rigged. But Putin did not rule out the possibility that individuals could have mounted a cyber attack on the U.S., given the current frosty relations.
They wake up in the morning today, read that something is going on in international relations. If they are patriots, they start to contribute their opinions in order to fight against those who speak ill about Russia. Theoretically, it's possible. We don't engage in that on a state level.
Amy Kellogg joins us now live from Milan, Italy, with more. Amy?
Hi, Heather. Well, that wording really does recall a recent Kremlin statement that it wasn't sending any troops to fight in eastern Ukraine, but it couldn't prevent volunteers from going there on their own to struggle against, to fight against perceived injustices there. So, again, today Putin again denied that he dispatched or managed any hackers, but he also said that hackers, no matter how good, how active, how clever, would not ultimately be able to influence the results of an election, because the public is simply too smart to be hoodwinked. Now, Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, speaking at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum today, fielded questions about a number of other topics as well, things he's been asked about before. He said Russophobia has to do with the end of a, quote, unipolar world, in other words, U.S. dominance, and those who don't like, quote, multipolarism will naturally lash out at Russia. President Putin repeated his fierce opposition to NATO expansion into Eastern Europe, Russia's western borders, but then raised a new issue, that reaction to North Korea's saber rattling is also becoming a thorn in Russia's side.
A very serious and alarming process is happening. Elements of anti-missile systems appear on Alaska and South Korea. Should we not pay attention to it, as in the western part of Russia? Of course not. We are thinking about how to respond to those challenges. This is a challenge for us.
So Putin really does think that missile defense is either an act of aggression against Russia, and he said today that even if North Korea were to get rid of its nuclear program altogether tomorrow, that the U.S. would continue to build missile defense systems simply under another pretext. Heather.
Amy Kellogg, live for us. Thank you, Amy.
So former FBI Director James Comey is ready to clear the air with Congress on claims the president pushed him to drop a probe of Michael Flynn. Fox News anchor Greg Jarrett joins us next with a look ahead to Comey's upcoming testimony. First, though, here is former State Department spokeswoman Marie Harf.
We want people to be cooperative here. I also want the Trump team to be cooperative.
Welcome back. Former FBI Director James Comey set to testify again before a Senate panel as early as next week, and is expected to tell lawmakers that the president asked him to back off the investigation into Michael Flynn and his ties to Russia. The Trump administration denies that claim and says that the real story is the unmasking of Flynn's name. But former State Department spokeswoman Marie Harf says that there's much more to it, Here's what she had to say earlier on America's Newsroom.
It is true that consumers of intelligence sometimes do have a reason to have names unmasked, but the congressman is absolutely right in that every 5 years or so we have a debate about intelligence and particularly looking at American citizens, and that's a debate that he was part of in Congress and that I'm confident we will have again. It's not limited to the Obama administration. So we want people to be cooperative here. I also want the Trump team to be cooperative, and the reports over the last few days that his lawyer won't cooperate with the subpoenas, that Mike Flynn is not willing to cooperate, that I think is problematic. And when the Trump team says we want to get to the facts here, their people need to play a role in that too.
So here's the thing. We are learning that Flynn has agreed to turn over some documents related to the investigation after originally invoking his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Greg Jarrett is an attorney and a Fox News anchor, and he's here to explain all of this for us. So let's begin with the president's words to Comey. And in that February meeting, could they constitute obstruction of justice?
Depends entirely, Heather, on what the president said in the meeting. Comey wrote a memo memorializing the conversation, gave it to a couple of colleagues who then read it to a reporter, and the memo allegedly quoted Trump as saying, "I hope you can let this go." Well, hoping that someone will be cleared is not the same thing as directing and ordering them to end an investigation or clear somebody. It's an aspirational expression, hoping events will turn out well for Michael Flynn. You know, it's kind of like, I hope it doesn't rain tomorrow. So if that's what Comey's testimony is, it probably is not obstruction.
So legally, speaking of that, what does the obstruction of justice statute require legally?
Well, the criminal statute requires proof that somebody actually tried to influence, impede, or obstruct the due administration of justice. Importantly, it also requires one more word. It's called corruptly. And that last word has special meaning in the law. Supreme Court has addressed it. They defined it as, we'll put it on the screen, wrongful, immoral, depraved, or evil. So again, hoping that somebody can let it go is probably too ambiguous to constitute a corrupt intent. The Supreme Court set a very high bar. It's very narrow, hard to prove.
So here's the big question a lot of people are asking. If Comey thought that the president was attempting to obstruct justice, did he have a duty to report it?
Absolutely. In fact, under the law, Comey is required to immediately inform his superiors at the Department of Justice. Failure to do so is actually a crime in and of itself. It's called misprision of felony. So Comey is surely going to be asked by the senators, did you notify anybody at DOJ? We don't know the answer, but there's been a reporting that he has done so, which may suggest he thought, well, the president's language may have been troubling, but I didn't think it rose to the level of obstruction of justice to elliptical language.
Yeah, elliptical language. Greg
well, that's
Jarrett,
how
yeah.
he talks.
That's good, yeah.
In very vague, broad, ambiguous, elliptical language. That ain't obstruction.
All right. Greg Jarrett, thank you very much for breaking it down for us.
Okay.
John?
A gun club sues Katie Couric, claiming her documentary used dishonest video editing to make them look bad on gun control. You'll hear what the judge decided.
Members who were featured in the clip. And the issue stems from a gap of silence inserted into the group interview to make the gun club members appear stumped by a question.
Let me ask you another question. If there are no background checks for gun purchasers, how do you prevent felons or terrorists from purchasing a gun?
The pause. Well, the judge decided that the interview scene was not false and dismissed the lawsuit.
Among the biggest issues facing President Trump and his administration, North Korea's nuclear ambitions. That rogue regime continues to conduct missile tests and threats to develop a nuclear warhead. One former Pentagon official says history may be repeating itself.
This is a condition of severe structural stress. In the North Korean case in particular, we see ourselves creeping towards, basically I've written about this as a Cuban Missile Crisis in slow motion.
That was Graham Allison, former Assistant Secretary of Defense and author of the new book, Destined for War, Can America and China Escape Thucydides' Trap? He joins me now. The progress that the North Koreans have made in terms of building a nuclear warhead is pretty frightening to you, and I guess it should be to all Americans.
Absolutely it is, and it is to anybody that's really focused on the issue. If you want a pretty good snapshot of it, I think General Mattis's, Secretary of Defense Mattis's presentation on one of the Sunday shows got right to the point. Basically, North Korea has acquired nuclear weapons. North Korea has acquired and built missiles that can deliver those nuclear weapons against South Korea and against Japan. And North Korea is on a path in the months immediately ahead to have a missile that can deliver a nuclear warhead against San Francisco or Los Angeles. And that's just an ugly fact.
Based on the title of your book, one has to wonder if there were some kind of preventive strike by the United States on the North, would China stay out of it?
Well, we should try to remember what happened the last time we saw this movie, which was the first Korean War, and this could be the beginning of the second. I think most of the American intelligence community believes that if we strike North Korea, which of course we can do, to prevent it conducting missile tests that will give it the capability to hold San Francisco or Los Angeles hostage. So we can conduct that test and we can execute it. But if we do, what's North Korea going to do in response? And I think most people believe, and I believe, that they will respond by artillery shells on Seoul that will kill about 1 million people in the first 48 hours.
Yeah.
Well, then it may be over, or then move, next move to our side. Yeah.
North Korea, even without nuclear weapons, is a frightening military power.
North Korea is genuinely weird. I think most Americans simply can't believe, and it's hard for even me to believe, and I study it a lot. I mean, here's a poor, impoverished, isolated country that has somehow built itself a nuclear arsenal, somehow built missiles that can attack the South, somehow developed all this artillery. And it's a poor country. It makes no sense, but it's a fact, yeah.
Well, President Trump said early in his administration that if China is not going to help solve the North Korean problem, then the U.S. will. Could the U.S. do it without China's help?
Well, yes, we can, at least prevent North Korea acquiring the ability to launch a nuclear weapon against the U.S. But we would have to do so, unless China is able to do something, by attacking North Korea. And as I say, most people, when they play through this game, see we attack North Korea attacks Seoul, we then attack all of the air, all of the missiles, all of the artillery that could kill more people in South Korea. Now we're into the Second Korean War. And in the First Korean War, as we marched rapidly towards the Chinese border, the Chinese entered the war and beat us back down to the 38th parallel. So again, most people believe, and I believe, that if you have a Second Korean War, we will see China fighting in that war to prevent the unification of Korea under a government that's a military ally of the U.S. So it's impossible, I mean, I think it's almost impossible to believe, but we're seeing a sequence of events like we saw in the Cuban Missile Crisis, in which a small action by our part for very legitimate reasons. I mean, who wants to imagine Kim Jong-il with nuclear weapons able to attack San Francisco or Los Angeles? Nobody. And President Trump has said, I'm telling you, this is not going to happen. And he tried to persuade Xi Jinping, you have to solve this problem, but if you don't, I will. And you're not going to like the way that I solve it. But if he does, by striking North Korea, there's a reasonable chance you see a sequence of events that nobody wants, but at the end of which you could even see China and the U.S. killing each other in thousands of numbers.
Yeah, we have to remember there are 30,000 U.S. troops in South Korea right there up against the DMZ. And as you say, 1 million South Koreans could be victims of an initial attack by the North?
That's the estimate from the Pentagon that's been reviewed and examined for now the past 15 years as we've come up to a couple of these other crossroads earlier. And the hard fact is, and President Trump points this out, each president, when he's come up to the edge of it, has basically kicked the can down the road. He says he's not going to do that.
And the can keeps getting more dangerous.
Unfortunately, it may even, in the next step, a capability to attack San Francisco or Los Angeles with nuclear weapons.
Sobering stuff. Graham Allison, thanks very much for sharing your thoughts with us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Well, the Veteran Affairs Department is still trying to recover after investigations uncovered systematic failures at VA facilities nationwide. What the man charged with implementing change is now saying, and we'll also hear from a wounded war hero on what he thinks should happen next. Plus...
Breaking now, terrifying moments at a Texas car dealership as a deadly shootout is caught on camera.
He got it.
Police releasing this video showing customers and employees running for their lives as bullets fly. The backstory, 2 bounty hunters tracked a fugitive to that business just outside of Dallas, but he doesn't go peacefully. Casey Stiegel, live from our Dallas Bureau with more on what happened there. Casey?
And John, when you see and hear what happened, you'll understand why it really is a miracle that no innocent bystanders were hurt in this whole ordeal.
He got it.
Wow. Cops say about 20 shots were fired in 6 seconds. Investigators tell us that a suspect wanted on a felony drug charge out of Minnesota was inside that Nissan car dealership. See the right-hand side of your screen? The 2 men approaching the glass office there in a second with their weapons drawn. Those are the bounty hunters trying to nab their guy. Then before you can blink, a gun battle breaks out.
What's the address of the emergency? Yes, in Greenville, at the Nissan dealership. There's no shooting. I'm hiding in the bathroom. Please hurry.
You can imagine the fear. People had no idea what was going on. Both bounty hunters and the suspect were killed, 3 people total. And now questions are being raised about whether the men, who were employed by a company called FNG Security and Investigations, behaved responsibly and what exactly they said to get inside that business.
We did not give them permission, but we also didn't tell them they had to leave. We were told they were federal agents, and so we didn't.
That is the owner of the car dealership there. The men's boss contradicts what he is saying, saying that his employees would have never misrepresented themselves and falsely identified themselves as federal agents. But this investigation is ongoing. Police looking into how they got access to the dealership, what they said, and what led up to those gunshots, John.
So both of the pursuers and the pursued, all 3 of them are dead. What a story. Casey Stiegel. Casey, stay on it. Thanks.
Well, the head of the Veteran Affairs Department giving an assessment on its condition years after scandal rocked the agency over reports of excessive wait times. Some veterans even dying while waiting to receive medical care. VA Secretary David Shulkin giving a White House briefing yesterday and saying that the department has made some improvements but still has a long way to go.
What I think the wait time showed us is that VA can't do this alone. We have to work with the private sector. Currently, right now, we're about 1/3 of all veterans are getting care outside of VA. I'm looking to build an integrated system of the very best of VA and the strength in VA and the best of the private sector to make one system work for veterans.
Joining me now is retired Marine Staff Sergeant Johnny Joey Jones, and he's also a former bomb technician. Thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
So you know firsthand, during your last tour in Afghanistan, you lost both of your legs above the knee. And so you know how the VA works or doesn't work. Can you share with us a recent personal experience that you've had?
Absolutely. And to preface this, I actually worked for the House Veterans Affairs Committee for a little over a year after my recovery. So I've seen it from both sides, or actually all sides, the nonprofit side as a patient and also as someone trying to fix the problem. And to kind of bring to light the boots on the ground, if you will, issues at the VA, you know, I recently had to do an intake screening at my local VA here in south of Atlanta in Georgia, and all the same problems that were there when I worked on the House Veterans Affairs Committee in 2010 seemed evident at this small clinic. Things like communication, accountability, and culture. Those are the true problems. I respect Secretary Shulkin. I appreciate his 13 points of places that need urgent and immediate attention, but quite honestly, those are symptoms. The cure for this problem is to change how the VA communicates, make people accountable, and actually change the culture, why people work there, and how they're compensated and rewarded for performance, not just being on the job for a certain amount of time.
So how do you change the communication, though? How can you make that better, in your opinion?
Well, For example, I sat down with a nurse and went through a screening where she asked me a group of questions. She actually gave me a PTSD screening, they called it, which was 4 questions. I had to ask her to repeat 4 times because I truly could not understand her. And that's not a remark against her accent. It's to say if this is the person who's the gatekeeper of screening people, they should be able to speak and communicate with anyone well. From there, I was sat down in front of a doctor who asked me almost the exact same questions. All of these questions, mind you, are readily available in my medical record. Things like any surgeries.
Yeah.
I don't know if he's asking me, have I had any surgeries ever recently, since the last time I've been at the VA, any surgeries coming up. I literally had to ask him to use complete sentences. So there's multiple communication problems, mainly communication between the VA and the patient. Trying to get an appointment scheduled for me was pulling teeth, exactly. And then how they communicate with various entities within the VA, how they communicate with each other, and most importantly, how they communicate with any and everyone treating that patient.
Yeah, we've heard about the wait times. You mentioned PTSD just briefly. You lost your childhood best friend to PTSD-related suicide back in 2012. He spoke a little bit about that. Do you think that we're doing enough in that area?
I think that the biggest problem we have with PTSD right now is that the pendulum swings both ways. For the longest time, we would not recognize it. Now that we do, it's almost a catch-all. It's a misnomer. We're not finding the actual root of problems that veterans are suffering from. I think this right here is the biggest problem, comparing yourself to 330 million Americans as they put themselves on Facebook and feeling like a failure. Some of that might be PTSD, some of it might be classical depression and anxiety and other psychological problems. We're just simply not preparing veterans to transfer into the civilian sector. And I think all of that has to be a part of the conversation. Simply finding the right medication or allowing for the right benefit, that doesn't fix anyone, and that's our biggest problem.
Yeah, with 20 veterans taking their lives each day on average. We have to do something about it. Thank you so much for joining us, and we appreciate you sharing your personal experiences as well.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
And thanks for your service as well.
Absolutely.
A White House staff shakeup has been one of the top stories floating around in recent weeks, but Press Secretary Sean Spicer is still on the job. So what is the media's obsession with staffing changes at 1600 Pennsylvania?
900. Well, according to the mainstream media, White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer was out of a job weeks ago with reports that he was going to be fired or demoted. But the resignation of the communications director, that just added fuel to the fire. But as we know, Spicer is still at the podium, despite the media's fixation on failure.
The departure might be signal some kind of broader reorganization in the West Wing. Obviously, we're hearing that there are campaigns, Gordon Lewandowski and David Bossie might be returning. There's a war room you might be setting up to deal with election motivations.
I don't think so. I think the president is very pleased with his team. And he has a robust agenda, just outlined, that he looks forward to working with Congress to get done to achieve results for the American people.
Howard Kurtz is a Fox News media analyst and host of Media Buzz here on the Fox News channel. He joins us to talk a little bit more about all this. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Heather.
So why is the media, or the mainstream media at least, so obsessed with these shake-up stories?
Very good question. I mean, it's a minor miracle that Sean Spicer walked out the other day because at the least the press kept telling us he wasn't going to do the briefings anymore if indeed he held on to his job. As recently as yesterday, MSNBC and others saying Reince Priebus could be replaced. There's been at least 8 or 9 waves of that. I've lost track. Remember when Steve Bannon was supposed to be toast because of his feud with Jared Kushner? He's still part of the inner circle. Look, these stories are fun, they're gossipy, they're juicy, and they're a lot easier for the media than dissecting the intricacies of the climate change treaty.
Yeah. Here's what Kellyanne Conway had to say. She was on Fox and Friends on Tuesday, and this is what she had to say about it.
I went back and looked at some of my notes. The very first time I was ever asked about somebody being pushed out of the White House was January 23rd. We had been here for 3 whole days. And so there's been a story a minute about that. It's easier to cover that than, I guess, learning the finer points of health care reform and tax reform and infrastructure and ISIS in retreat.
That goes to what you were just saying. You know, instead of speaking about the issues, it's easier to talk about these non-stories.